Good afternoon. Welcome to the April 9th meeting of the Columbia Rotary Club. Glad to have you all here on this very dreary Monday. We're going to go ahead and get started with Jim Smithwick and Rusty DePass and our national anthem.
I'd be amiss if I didn't remind you of the Rotarian magazine. I had an opportunity to go to Australia last month, and I took, instead of taking a novel, I took all of my past Rotary magazines and read them all from cover to cover. So if you've got plenty of time, if you're not reading the magazine, you're missing a lot of what Rotary is all about. You know, a lot of people wonder how in the world I got on that program. Well, back in the old days, a long time ago, in another life, we used to have a Rotarian committee called the Magazine Committee, which no longer exists. But anyway, I was chairman of it, and that's how I got involved in reading the journal every month, and so I continued that. And I would recommend it if you don't do it. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we want to take this opportunity to thank you for this organization that we call Rotary. An organization of over 2 million people throughout the world that is committed to serving mankind and whose object is to encourage and foster the ideal of service, of worthy enterprise, and to encourage the development of acquaintances as an opportunity for service, and to have high ethical standards in business and professions that we recognize as the worthiness of all useful occupations, and that we apply this ideal of service in each Rotarian personal, business, and community life, and that Rotary advances international understanding and peace and goodwill throughout the world through our ideal of service. Now, Lord, we ask you to bless this food as we use it to nourish our bodies as we provide this service to mankind. Amen.
All right, before I ask Miss Ellen to come up here, if you guys will hold up the cart buckets. I did want to tell you guys something really quick. I watched a movie this weekend. It's called REV. Has anybody seen that movie? It's about Robin and Diana Cavendish. And Robin Cavendish was the longest living respinaut, is what they called him. But he lived on a respirator for 40 years. He was stricken with polio when he was 28 years old. And he lived on a respirator for the rest of his life for 40 years. He died when he was 68 years old, and it was a wonderful movie. I was born 20 years after the discovery of the polio vaccine, and so it never really had an impact on my life. But the movie was really interesting to see how people with polio existed prior to his work and the vaccine. So anyway, check that out if you're looking for something to watch. And Miss Ellen, do you want to come up here? We'll welcome our visiting Rotarians and guests.
Thank you, President Gary. Appreciate it. And I'm Ellen Hayden, and I did not get to welcome each one of you. So for those of you I didn't get to welcome, I regret that you might not adjust your lunch as well. But hopefully you feel welcomed, because each of you is warmly welcomed here today. We have only one visiting Rotarian with us today, which is unusual for our club. Mike. We are the largest club in the area, and so we usually have several visiting Rotarians, but you're so distinguished that we feel that you make up for 4 or 5 visiting Rotarians. We have Mike Montgomery. Mike, please stand. Mike is the past district governor, and he is from Washington. Am I correct? 15 miles north of Seattle. Is that correct? And he is with FEMA. So we do welcome him here for many levels of reasons. We're glad to have you. We have 2 guests, as I understand it, but they weren't really sure. So I'm hoping that I'm correct. If not, please stand if you have a guest, and Lanier Jones will come with the microphone.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Ballback, and my guest is Peter Ballback, who is a former neighbor of M.Z. Wilkins and my husband.
Welcome, Pete.
Bernie Bayback, my guest today, Nikki Hutchison. Nikki now works for AARP. She previously worked for a group, SV Economics, and I served on the board of it.
Nikki, welcome. We're glad to have
I'll have to add to them, I guess, as I go across the room here.
you. You're just fine. Sing and dance a little bit.
I'm Adam Jordan. My guest today is Dr. Rebecca Denloxen. She's the president of Acuitas Economics.
Welcome, Dr. Rebecca. We enjoyed your presentation.
And I'm Rusty DePass, and my guest today is Hunter Wilson, who's been with us here before. Hunter is in the commercial mechanical contracting business with Hoffman & Hoffman and Casey. And he has been elected to membership in the club. 114 to 106, with 5 abstentions. And he will be inducted next week.
Wonderful. Welcome, Hunter. We look forward to having you. Any other guests? Bill Stangler, we welcome you, but someone will formally welcome you in a minute. All right. Make sure that everybody feels welcome. Turn to the person on your right. Say, do you feel welcomed? And if they say no, you make them feel welcome. And if they say yes, say, I do too.
Thank you, Miss Ellen. I could just listen to her talk all day. Do y'all feel welcome? Good. Quick announcement, Jerry Pate sent me something about the Rotary Foundation. Robin Gorman wanted me to tell you guys that she does have the list of who is close to being a Paul Harris, to be recognized for Paul Harris. And she said that she would have those to everybody. She would be calling you this week if you're close on that. But a note about the Rotary Foundation, there's something called Charity Navigator, and they analyze financial documents of tens of thousands of nonprofits and scores their financial health, and less than 1% of the charities rated by Charity Navigator earn perfect scores. However, the Rotary Foundation was one of 30 charities that did earn a perfect score, so round of applause for the Rotary Foundation. Jerry, I think I saw you here, but Jerry, thank you for sending this. I appreciate that. Now, I'm going to call Carl Byers up here, and we're going to talk about golf. So, eyes front, people. No averting the eyes. We're talking about golf. I expect eye contact from all of y'all.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the last cold, rainy Monday in April. So I'm proud to be up here on behalf of the golf committee. We're making some good progress. We've got 11 teams. We really need about 18 teams, so there's plenty of room. We're making some good progress on sponsorships. We're not there yet, but there's still time. So 2 weeks from today, we'll be at Windermere. Everybody knows where that is. We look forward to seeing those of you that can make it there. We understand there's a lot of conflicts in April, but if you can't come out and play or volunteer, there's still a way to participate. So there's a flyer on your table. If somebody will hold it up on your table, kind of wave it around, I'll know you're hearing me up here. There's all kind of ways to participate. And we've had a lot of good participation, so I'll be at the back of the room with the Tom Gammon table. Tom and I were talking about traditions and masters. We talked about the tradition of this tournament in the club, and I believe we determined it goes back 25 years with Tom and Keith, John Keith, I believe, were part of the first, so that's a pretty cool tradition. It's taken on different forms just for fun, or for fundraising. This year is fundraising. So the board has picked this to be our chance to shine. And I know many of you all we have to do is ask and you'll come forward, like Mr. Jack Huck. Thank you very much. We asked, you came forward with a $500 sponsorship. So be like Jack. So the other thing I wanted to say, I was out front talking to everybody and I said, well, what if I took the sign-in sheet? And what if I cut it up in strips with everybody's name on it? And what if I took out the people that are participating and left only those that weren't participating? And what if I put those names in a bucket? And what if we drew the names out of the bucket? Well, two things would happen. One, some lucky person would get to stand up and talk about how much they love Rotary and what they're planning to do for the tournament. The second thing that would happen is Debbie would be unhappy trying to figure out who was here today. Here we go. Okay, y'all ready for this? This is your lucky day. Ask and you'll get what you want. Thank you for eating at the egg roll station. I don't know how that happened. But I am asking, and I do want you to come forward. We'll be at the back, and so come see me. Be like Jack.
Be like Jack. Thank you, Carl. Appreciate y'all and the whole golf committee. I appreciate everybody and all that you've done, all the guys back there. And I think, Andy, are you good you're good on volunteers? Could use a few more boots? Yeah. So if you are looking to do something that day, if you're looking to participate, please see Andy Shane. He needs a few more people to help out. All right. So we have another treat. Mr. Henry Morris, he's going to come up and do health and happiness.
Hello again. I'm Henry Morris, for those of you that know me, and I'm here to do health and happiness. First, I have some announcements. Bill Clowney's daughter, Candy, she's having treatment for cancer, and I want you to know that's going well, and she's doing much better. So I want to continue to keep her in your prayers as she continues to go through her treatment. And also want to let you know that Ted Creech lost his father on Friday, so we want to keep his family in prayers, send him cards, and maybe give him a phone call, let him know that we're thinking of him and his family as well. And also, I want you to know that, although we know that it is raining outside, we know that, but it's never raining in Rotary, because our sunshine is always glowing in Rotary. Amen? Y'all agree? You don't agree? Wow, thank you. I got one. Okay. Always sunshine in Rotary. It's so good to be here. And I have a few things I want to read to you today, and then I'll be done, as far as health and happiness is concerned. This is a known author. Said there was once a little boy who had a bad temper. That may be you. Sometimes you think about back in the day. That may have been you. But once a little boy who had a bad temper, and his father gave him a bag of nails and told him that every time he lost his temper, he would hammer a nail into the fence. That first day, the boy had driven in 37 nails in the fence. Wow. And over the next few weeks, he had learned to control his anger. And when he did that, the number of nails that went into the fence gradually dwindled down. And he discovered it was easier to hold his temper than to drive those nails into the fence. Finally, the day came when the boy didn't lose his temper at all. And he told his father about it, and his father suggested that the boy now pull out one nail at a time for each day that he was able to hold his temper. Now the days passed, and the young boy was finally able to tell his father that all the nails were gone out of the fence. And the father took his son by the hand and led him to the fence. And he said, "You have done well, my son. But look at the holes that are in the fence. The fence will never be the same. When you say these things, when you say things in anger, they leave scars like this." And he showed him the fence. He said, "You can put a knife in a man and draw it out, and it won't matter how many times you say, 'I'm sorry.' The wound is still there. Make sure you control your temper the next time you or the temper of someone says something, or to watch your mouth when things come about." That's something that we need to think about when we are talking, and just to guard our mouths. And that's just something that I thought is very healthy for each and every one of us as we go on. I have another one I want to share with you. And this is by an unknown author. It's that a parable is told of a farmer who owned an old mule. And the mule fell into the farmer's well. And the farmer heard the mule braying, complaining, "Ah!" And whatever the mule do when they fall into wells, who knows? But after carefully assessing the situation, the farmer felt sorry for the mule. But he decided that neither the mule nor the well was worth saving. So instead, he called his neighbors over, and he talked to them and got them together, and he told them what had happened, and he asked them to help him haul dirt to bury the old mule that fell in the well, and to put him out of his misery. Initially, the old mule was hysterical, but as the farmer and his neighbor continued to shovel dirt into the hole, a thought struck the mule. It suddenly dawned on him that every time they shoveled a load of dirt and it landed on his back, he should shake it off and step up. He said, "Oh, what a great idea." So what this old mule did, blow after blow, shovel after shovel, dirt after dirt, he would shake it off and step up. Shake it off and step up. And he did that repeatedly. Each time the dirt came and hit him. And it encouraged him to continue to go on. So no matter how painful the blow was or distressing the situation seemed, the old mule fought panic and just kept right on shaking it off and stepping up. You guessed it. It wasn't long before the old mule, battered and exhausted, stepped triumphantly over the wall of the well. What seemed like it would bury him actually ended up being a blessing to him. Why? Because no matter what happened in his situation, He never let his adversities get the best of him. May that be something we think about when adversities come upon us, and they will at times. May we just shake it off and step up in each thing that we do. I have one more and I'm done. As far as I did the health, now I want to do something happy, if I can. One day, a father and this is an unknown author. One day, a father and his rich family took his son on a trip to the country with the firm purpose of showing him how poor people can be. Then they spent the day and night on the farm with a very poor family. When they got back from their trip, the father asked his son, "Well, how was the trip, son?" "Very good, Dad," he said. "Did you see how the poor people can be?" the father asked. "Yeah. And what did you learn?" "Well," the son answered, "well, I saw that we have a dog at home, and they have 4. We have a pool that reaches in the middle of the garden, and they have a creek that has no end. We have an imported lamp in the garden, and they have stars that they can see every day. Our patio reached out to the front yard, and they have a whole horizon that they could see." When the little boy was finished, his father was speechless. And he added, "Thank you, Dad, for showing me how poor we are." Isn't that true? Isn't that true? It all depends on the way you look at things in life. You know, if you have love, friends, family, health, good humor, and a positive attitude towards life, I like to say you've got everything. You can't buy any of these things. You may have all the material possessions you can imagine, provision for the future, or etc. But if you have poor spirit, you have nothing. Thank you.
What a treat. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask President-elect Stephen Creech to come up here. We're going to discuss the bylaws that you'll see on your table. He's going to do a brief discussion.
Thank you, President Kerry. Major, I don't know what you did to have to do health and happiness back to back, but you do a great job and we appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to talk to you about some bylaws amendments that have been proposed by your board. This is not the most exciting topic, but it is a very necessary topic that an organization such as ours that's over 100 years old, the normal course of its business, that it would review its bylaws from time to time. Our board reviewed our bylaws and offered the revisions that are before you today. There's 2 handouts you should have. You should have a copy of a memo that explains and summarizes the bylaws changes, as well as the actual red line copy of the bylaws that strikes out and adds words so you can see exactly what is being changed. Our bylaws were last updated in October of 2003. And as I said earlier, it's a good practice that occasionally we would review these and make sure that we keep up with the times. There are really about 5 really substantive changes that are going into these bylaws, and I'm going to summarize them for you. These are also summarized on the memo, and I'll tell you why we felt they were important and worthy of your consideration. The first is the election of a club secretary. I'll tell you personally, I served as club secretary for 2 years before I was elected to the board. The secretary is oftentimes not an elected board member and just serves at the request of the president. John Johnston and Mark Sullivan asked me to serve as secretary for them. And I'll tell you, it gives you a lot of insight into how the governance of the club works. And I feel that's been very helpful for me in my preparation. And we talked about this at the board meeting, and basically what it can do is create some leadership continuity. So every year we elect a president-elect, and that president-elect takes over. They're elected in December, they take over as president-elect in July, and they serve for a year as president-elect, and then they become president. This would provide for the election of a club secretary who would follow that same matriculation, but they would follow from club secretary to president-elect and then to president. It is a different change, but I feel it is necessary for our club to consider this, and I think it adds to a lot of continuity and leadership, and it also helps in the planning of the organization. The second proposed change is the establishment of a programs committee. The current bylaws do talk about a programs committee, and but I feel like programs in our club, actually I know this, I'm responsible for programs. It is, it's not an easy task. You know, that's 44, 45 programs a year that you're responsible for. And I didn't want to make this change or propose this change while I was doing it because that would look kind of selfish. But I do feel like there are so many good members of this club and really capable leaders in this club who see the job as the president-elect, and they shy away from their willingness to participate on the board for fear that they would be elected president-elect and have to do 44 programs. And I think if we emphasize the committee aspect of programs, it could help future president-elects and also organize us a little more where maybe it's not such a burden, and more people would probably be willing to come forward into leadership, and that's just another benefit of that. So the third proposed change is, and these are really sprinkled throughout, I have an example here, and this is just updates to club practices. We haven't updated our bylaws since 2003, and probably 4 or 5 years ago we started meeting at 12:30 instead of 1 o'clock. So just simple changes like that to club practices are reflected in here. Fourth is the establishment of a 50% attendance standard. This is a reduction from 80%, which is currently reflected. The bylaws say that in order to be considered as a nominee to the board, you have to, the names are drawn from those members who have attended 80% of the meetings. And I'll tell you, often in the past few years, we have suspended the bylaws to reduce that number to 50% so that we have a wide enough net of candidates to choose from. You can still be a good member of this club and attend 50% of the meetings, and I think that's the message we want to send our club. I think that's also a message that we want to send our prospective members, that is. You can still be effective by attending 50% of the meetings. And Rotary International actually changed their standards to 50% for meetings, and that's really just to be more keeping up with the times. So I feel it's important that we follow that. Lastly, the majority of the red lines you see on your bylaws have to do with the committee structure. And what we've done is simplify the committee structure so that it's based on our current practice, and it's committees that we feel are important to have a thriving club. The existing bylaws have 4 different types of committees, not 4 different committees, but 4 different types of committees. Vocational service, community service, international service, club service, and then under those different subsets of committees. The new bylaws that are being proposed have 7 committees, and they are what we feel are appropriate and important to have a thriving club. And those include community service, fellowship, a membership committee, a membership development committee, a programs committee, as I talked about, public relations committee, and the Rotary Information Committee. So all of the details and functions of those committees are right here for you to consider. Let's see which slide I'm on. Does that say process? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So it's very important that we follow our current bylaws and the process that is prescribed in those bylaws when making changes. So I'd like to talk a little bit about this. This is really based on our intention. The good news is there's no rush to do this. We're being very thoughtful about it, and so if there's a huge oversight, we could certainly consider that. But barring any oversight, this is the process that we would follow. So today, the official notice is being given to the membership. If you have those copies, I would ask that you take them with you. Members that are not in attendance are going to be mailed a copy of these bylaws and the memo, and that just really helps us save on postage. So if you would take them with you, we'll look at your name on on the attendance roster, and we will not mail you one. And then we're also going to post the bylaws on our website just to make sure everybody has a copy. The existing bylaws prescribe that 10 days should pass before we make any changes or before we have a vote, so people can consider the changes. And so on our April 30th meeting, we would intend to have a vote up or down on the approval of these new bylaws. There is a quorum requirement, so I would ask that you please try to attend the April 30th meeting. We have a great speaker coming that day, so it should be a very popular draw. And we're also going to allow for some email voting, because we have a very large club with 230 some odd members. It's important that we have at least 115 vote on this or to approve if that is the will of the club. So my cell phone number is at the bottom of the memo. I welcome any questions. I don't want to cut into our speaker's time, so I probably have just a minute for any questions if you have it now. If not, feel free to call my cell phone and we can talk at length. John.
One of our most active and vital committees is the scholarship committee. They didn't on there. I don't know whether they're in a different category or they weren't listed as a separate committee.
I think they were listed under a club service. I can't remember right now, but that's an important one for sure that needs to be added. Any other oversights?
Quick question.
Andrew.
Currently, the process, I believe, as I understand it, allows for the club to elect board members, and then the board members get together and select the president-elect. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So how does the election of the secretary fit into that?
So the next election, we would have to elect a board, and then that board would have to elect both a president-elect and a secretary. Thank you. Forgot to say that. Any other questions? All right. Thank you for your time.
All right, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to ask Matt Kendall to come up and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Carrie. It is my great privilege today to introduce to you Bill Stangler, who is your Congaree River Keeper. Now, he is not the Congaree Strangler, as has been announced in the media and some other things, so don't worry about him. He's perfectly safe. We're in good hands. But since moving to Columbia in 2005 from North Carolina to attend the University of South Carolina, Bill has just immersed himself in our rivers, recreationally, ecologically, and communally. At USC, he graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Geography, focusing on biogeography, landscape ecology, and river science. Most of his research efforts focused on our area rivers. After working as a local river guide for a number of years, he came on board as the Congaree River Keeper in 2009. Before, and I've been here about 17 years, but many of you know that before the Congaree River Keeper existed in the Midlands almost 10 years ago, many locals were afraid of our rivers. They were afraid to even touch the water. Decades of dumping and pollution scared folks away from really what is our most beautiful asset. It's the Congaree River Keepers' belief that our rivers are our most precious natural resource and must be protected for generations to come. And I can tell you, in my job of promoting downtown Columbia, every time I speak, I want to speak about new shops and restaurants and hotels and things that are opening downtown, or what we're doing with the great things in the Vista with Meredith. But all I get is, what about the river? What about the river? What's happening on the river? So he's going to tell you today because it really is exciting. Bill also serves on the boards of the Friends of the Congaree Swamp and the Palmetto Paddlers. In his spare time, he also paddles. He's a hiker and a general outdoor enthusiast. And next summer, he's getting married to his fiancée, Sarah McGregor, who is an art teacher, and it has to be at River Bluff High School. So on that, Bill Stangler.
Rotarians? So I will, it's tough to follow a discussion of bylaws, so I will try and keep this as interesting as that was. But I'm really happy to be here. I actually had something else come up and I had a different offer today. I was told I could go out and film a fishing show. And I looked at my calendar and I said, oh, I've got this Rotary Talk. And then I got up this morning and it was cold and raining and I said, thank God for this Rotary Talk. Because I can go fishing some other day when it's warmer. But I am really happy to be here. So my name is Bill Stangler and I am your Congaree River Keeper. And what does that mean other than a really neat job title? I run a grassroots nonprofit organization that works to protect the three rivers here in the Midlands, the Broad, the Lower Saluda, and the Congaree. I'm also one of more than 300 water keepers working around the globe. So there are folks like me running nonprofit organizations on 6 different continents. We don't have anybody in Antarctica, we're working on that, but we have people working across the globe. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you a little about my organization, how it got started, what we're doing, some of the major projects we're working on, and then I'm going to open it up to questions because these are your rivers and I want to hear your thoughts, your concerns, and have a conversation with you about them. But to get to that, it's, what does Riverkeeper really mean? What is it that this organization does? And the basic fundamental philosophy behind Congaree Riverkeeper and every one of those other organizations working around the globe is that water is a common good. That these rivers and streams and lakes and bays belong to each and every one of us. And no one person, one company, or one entity has the right to damage them so the rest of us can't use them. This is not a new idea. It's actually something that we can find deeply ingrained in our human history. It's not a left idea or a right idea. It is not a radical idea, though I have been called a radical extremist for believing that the rivers belong to you. And you can take that concept of water as a common good, and you can find it in our laws, our environmental laws, like the Clean Water Act that was passed in 1972 and signed into law by Richard Nixon, that staunch environmentalist that he was. You can go back a little bit further in American history and you can find that concept of waters of the United States belonging to its citizens in things like the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899. You can take another step back, you can go back to the Magna Carta, and you can see that discussion of water as a common good. And I'm going to take one big jump back. You can go back to Roman Justinian law, the concept of jus fluvium, or the right to the river. So this idea that these rivers are yours is something that's deeply ingrained in our history. But a little bit about a different history is, how did Riverkeeper get started? And that story is an interesting one, because the first Riverkeeper organization started in the 1960s on the Hudson River in New York. And it was really a group of commercial fishermen, mostly shad fishermen, who were watching that river die. And they were multi-generational fishermen, and they knew that that next generation wasn't going to be able to have that same livelihood. There were illegal discharges, there were sewer plants, there were industrial facilities. The Indian Point power plant was grinding up fish in their water intakes by the thousands every single day, and they knew that their river was disappearing in front of them. So a group of commercial shad fishermen got together in a small cinder block room, and they were pissed off. They didn't know what to do. And a lot of these guys were Korean War and Vietnam War vets, and so they started talking about ideas. And the ideas that popped up were a little interesting. One guy says, hey, let's take a mattress to the pipe coming out of the rail yard that's always belching out oil, and let's stuff it up there and light it on fire. And another guy says, hey, let's take a raft of dynamite up to the water intake at the power plant, and let's blow it up because they keep killing the fish. And luckily, in the back of that room was a gentleman who was a writer for Sports Illustrated, mostly wrote about fly fishing. And he said, hey guys, I just read this law, the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899, and it allows citizens to take polluters to court to stop them, and if you win, you can collect a bounty. And there was a lot of grumbling in the room, and eventually the group agreed, okay, we're going to try this lawsuit thing, but if that doesn't work, then we're going to go blow something up. And it worked. They went after a couple of these rinky-dink sewer plants that were discharging stuff. They went after Anaconda Steel that was dumping waste in the river. They went after the rail yard, and they started making real progress. And people started noticing, not just there on the Hudson River, but around the country. So there's a guy who's a lobsterman who worked in Long Island Sound, and he called him up and he said, hey, I've got problems on my water, what do I do? And they said, well, I guess you can start a soundkeeper organization. He said, how do I do it? And they said, I don't know, you have to figure it out. And he did, and then other people found out. Folks in Casco Bay, Maine, and Puget Sound in Washington, on the Chattahoochee River in Atlanta, And that movement grew from local people stepping up to protect their waterways in their communities. That story on the Hudson River isn't too different than what happened in Columbia. It just took us a little bit longer to get there. Some of you may remember this. In the summer of 2008, there was a private sewer company on the lower Saluda River called Alpine Utilities. And Alpine dumped more than 1 million gallons of raw sewage in the Saluda River. At the time, I was working as a river guide for Adventure Carolina. And I started to see something happen. My friends, my coworkers, my customers started getting sick. They were getting rashes, they were getting infections, they were getting stomach bugs. And we didn't know what was happening. Folks that were going fishing and tubing and kayaking, we knew that there was something wrong in the water. There was something happening, but we didn't know what it was. So DHEC came out and they did an investigation and they found that it was this sewer company that had dumped all this raw sewage in the river and not told anybody about it. And so DHEC went in and they said, hey, we're going to fine you guys a couple $1,000s. And then the EPA came in and they said, hey, we're going to fine them a couple $1,000s more. And the guys who owned that company, they looked at their bottom line, they looked at their books and they said, okay, that's just the cost of doing business. It would have cost them more to clean up that plant and stop putting people at risk. So they just said, this is just a cost. We're just going to add it to the line item of costs because that's just how we're going to operate. And I was working with a young man at the time who was a river guide with me named Alan Mirzad, and Alan said, this is absolutely ridiculous. This is not the way that anyone should be allowed to do business. So he called up Waterkeeper Alliance and he said, hey, we need a riverkeeper down in Columbia, South Carolina. And he told them what was going on. They said, you're right, you do. And then he said, well, what do we do? He said, well, it sounds like you're the guy. Fill out the application and get to work. And then Alan said, oh, shit. But he did. He built that organization. It took about a year to build the organization from the ground up, to get a board of directors, to get approved as a nonprofit. One of the first things we did as an organization, and I say we because at the time when Alan and I would finish river guiding, we'd go sit on the rocks of the river and drink a beer and talk about how we could grow Riverkeeper. We decided to take it to that company. Started building a Citizen Clean Water Act lawsuit against them. And the guys that owned that company saw the writing on the wall. They knew they were going to get dragged into court. So they sold their company to a group out of Texas called Nye America. And we sat down with them in DHEC and we said, you bought a broken system. You cannot and will not operate it like your predecessor. And they signed a deal with us and with DHEC to spend $5 million over 5 years rehabbing that system. They've spent well over $6.5 million making significant upgrades. They're not the best, but they are significant strides from where they were. That's how Riverkeeper started. It usually starts in a crisis. We've done a lot of work since then. So Alan was Riverkeeper for about 1.5 years. We had a wonderful person named Stuart Greeter who was retired DNR, did the job for about a year, and I have been the first full-time, fully paid Congaree Riverkeeper for the last 6.5 years. And we've taken on a number of different issues. I'm going to talk about a couple of those right now. So we do, our basic idea is kind of 3 different pieces. We do outreach and education. So I talk to community organizations like this. I talk to school groups, Boy Scout troops, Girl Scout troops, all sorts of folks. I also have to educate our elected officials, which is a little harder than Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts sometimes. Talking about the issues that our rivers face and what they and we as a community can do to protect them. That's a really important part. We do advocacy work. So that means that I am commenting on permits, we're organizing volunteer cleanups, we're collecting water quality samples on a regular basis. I'll talk a little bit more about that monitoring work. It means that I go and I pick fights at the State House on a pretty regular basis these days as well. But probably the most important piece of what we do as an organization is we enforce environmental laws. When DHEC falls down on the job, when the EPA is nowhere to be seen, when local governments aren't doing what they need to do, we step in and we enforce those environmental laws. And to kind of make that point, I'm going to tell what I think might be the briefest version of the Carolina Water Service saga that I can try to tell. How many of y'all have heard of Carolina Water Service before? Okay, thank you, Andy, for making sure that was always in the news. So Carolina Water Service is another one of these private sewer companies. They've got a bunch of sewer plants along the lower Saluda River. When I first took my job as Congaree Riverkeeper, I said, I'm going to go and paddle every mile of my 90 miles of river, and I'm going to look at it through a different lens. You know, I've paddled these rivers before, I've spent a lot of time on them, but I'm going to take a different approach to it. And one of the first spots I did was down the lower Saluda again. And I got to I-20 and I looked to my right and I saw a pipe belching out sewage. It smelled bad, there was foam, and it was just bursting out of this pipe. And I said, okay, well that really doesn't look right. And I did a little research. I called some folks at DHEC, I pulled some documents, and I said, okay, well, this company here, Carolina Water Service, the sewer discharge, has a long history of violations. Really high bacteria numbers that could make people sick, biochemical oxygen demand that could hurt water quality and hurt the fish and other aquatic organisms. And I started digging a little more, and I said, well, okay, well, this discharge isn't even supposed to be here. This permit expired in 1999, and this company was supposed to end this discharge to the river, a decade ago. And so we started working around and looking at this, and I went and I spent a lot of time getting documents, FOIA documents from DHEC, court documents, copying all stuff, and we built a legal case, a Citizen Clean Water Act case, just like those folks on the Hudson did. We said, we're going to enforce our environmental laws because no one else is doing it. And so what we did was we filed in federal court a citizen lawsuit. We said, you guys are violating the Clean Water Act, and you need to come into compliance. CWS did a couple things. First thing they did was they said, no, you're not allowed to sue us. Judge, you got to throw this case out. They don't have standing. We went in front of the federal judge. Judge said, no, this case can proceed. They absolutely have standing. Then they said, okay, you can sue us, but you can't sue us right now. Let's just all wait for a while. We said, no, we've been waiting for a long time. Went in front of the judge again. Judge said, nope, keep going. So then they said, all right, fine. Hey, DHEC, can you give us a brand new permit that lets us keep doing this like we've been doing for a long time? And DHEC said, sure, why not? And DHEC tried to issue these guys a permit to let them continue discharging wastewater into the lower Saluda River. We told DHEC we thought that was a bad idea. They said, well, we've got a public hearing coming up. You should bring some of your friends, maybe write some comments. We did exactly that. More than 300 people showed up at the DHEC auditorium for that hearing. Of those 300 people, one person was in favor of giving that company a permit. That was the attorney for Carolina Water Service. Everyone else there was against it. It was an amazing group of people. We had fly fishermen, kayakers, families. We had elected officials. We had representatives, senators, mayors. We actually managed to get the head of the South Carolina Democratic and Republican Party together. Jamie Harrison and Matt Moore stood up and said, we both think the Saluda River is too important to let this, if you can get those guys to agree on anything, it's pretty amazing. And they stood up and did it. But what really took the day there was not the amazing outpouring of support that we saw, which was tremendous. It was the fact that a few nights before that hearing, I stayed up and I read every page of R61-9, which is about 100 pages of wastewater regulations. It took me about 4 beers to get through it. And I found this line. It said, you cannot issue a permit to a wastewater facility that is required to tie into a regional system and the regional system is available. Very plain language. So DHEC was going to violate their own regulations to allow this company off the hook to continue polluting our river and continue putting the people who care about it and use it at risk. Now, we brought that up and also dropped a 60-page comment letter on their desk. And lo and behold, they turned around and they said, you know what, we're not going to issue this permit. In fact, we are going to, in what is almost unheard of in DHEC, we're going to deny this permit for this company. And of course, that was appealed and we went to the administrative law court. At that point, we had parallel suits in the federal court and in state administrative law court. We won last year. In March of last year, the federal judge ruled in our favor, said that the CWS had been violating the Clean Water Act very clearly. There was a court order that they end that discharge by April 1st of this year. In February, the town of Lexington condemned that facility. On February 28th at 1:15 p.m., that discharge of illegal wastewater into the Saluda River ended permanently. That would not have happened if we hadn't been there. If we'd have said, okay, well maybe DHEC will do it, or maybe this company will shape up, or maybe something else will happen, this would never have happened. That's the role that my organization plays. And to really kind of nail it down to one thing, early on in that process, essentially what their attorneys said to us is they said, we're going to bury you guys in legal motions and paperwork and court fees. You're going to pay your attorneys so much, you'll never be able to see this through. My attorneys are this wonderful folks from the Southern Environmental Law Center. I don't pay them a dime. So I looked at these guys and I said, look, I'm not paying my attorneys, and I have literally nothing better to do with my time than fight with you for this river. So bring it on. And they didn't know how to respond to that. And they still kind of don't. But that sent a message, that win sent a message to everyone in this region that we have someone watching out and fighting for our rivers, that business as usual is over. You don't get to do what Alpine did, what CWS did. We will fight. And right after they shut down that facility at I-20, they said, you know what, we know what's coming next. They're going to shut down the facility at Friarsgate on the lower Saluda River and tie that into the regional system by the end of this year. That means that since I started my job, we will have eliminated 70% of the wastewater load going into the lower Saluda River. because that river is such an amazing piece of what we have here in the Midlands. Some of the best urban fishing and urban whitewater in the eastern U.S. You can catch a trophy rainbow trout, you can run a class 3 rapid, you can come around a bend and you can see the top of the State House and the Columbia skyline. You cannot do that in any other city that I know of. You can go down the Broad, you can catch some of the best smallmouth fishing, which is what I was going to be doing on that fishing show I bailed on. You can go to the Congaree and you can catch striped bass. You can paddle all the way down past South Carolina's only national park in Congaree National Park, some of the tallest trees on the East Coast. We have such amazing, amazing opportunities here in the Midlands we need to embrace. And there's a reason that everyone's asking him about the rivers every time we talk, because they are such a tremendous part of our history. They're going to be a huge part of our future. So I mentioned a couple of things we work on. Water quality monitoring is an incredibly important part of what we do. We want to back all of our decisions with sound science. A couple of years ago, I looked at DHEC's data and their records, and I said, we don't have enough information to make a lot of these decisions. I'm going to start filling in the gaps. I started pulling samples on a semi-regular basis. We started finding problems that other people either weren't finding or didn't want to see. A great example of that is I went out to the Broad River, pulled a sample below Richland County's wastewater plant, and I got a hit. Lab came back and said, hey, those are really high bacteria numbers. I called them up at the plant. I said, hey guys, what happened on Wednesday? What was their first response? How do you know about that? I said, well, I'm always out pulling samples. You never know where I am. And they said, okay, so well, your permit requires you to report any plant upset. Did you call it into DHEC? I said, well, we were going to do that, so we're just getting around to it right now. So I hang up that call. I call up the folks over at DHEC and I say, hey, I got a hit on this thing. There's a plant upset. Nobody called it in. While I'm on the phone, oh, hey, Richland County's calling me. I said, okay, I bet they are. We ended up actually documenting some significant issues at that plant, resulted in DHEC taking an enforcement action. Council had to do an emergency session to get funding to fix that, to bring in a contractor. That stuff wouldn't have happened if we weren't out there putting eyes on that. We've had that situation come up a number of times. Identified multi-million-gallon sewer spills that nobody would have found. Identified plant upsets that companies were going to try and sweep under the rug. But that monitoring program we did also opened the eyes to other folks in our community and said, we can do better than just me running around once every other month and trying to pull samples. And last year we got together with a coalition. It included myself, DHEC, USC School of Public Health, recreation providers like Saluda Shoals Park, and municipalities, and the sewer providers. And we built a program, the Midlands Rivers Coalition, and we have a website called howsmyscriver.org. You can go to it and you can see real-time bacteria data. We do weekly monitoring, and we're going to kick it off starting next month for the recreational season up and down the Saluda, Broad, and Congaree rivers. You can go, if there's a little green guy swimming, that means the water quality is good. If it's orange, because this is Columbia, we don't like orange, that means it's bad. And so, it works. Orange is bad. So that works. That was an amazing coalition. USC was able to build a website. We were able to get funding from all these different parties, including these sewer companies, so that we could have better data. Because it's not just great to tell people, hey, there's a pollution problem here, avoid this area. But what we heard earlier is people were scared to get back in the water. After we had upsets at these plants from Carolina Water Service or sewer spills from the city of Columbia, people said, well, I'm not going to get in that Saluda River. I don't want to go tubing. I hear that's gross water. We can now tell them with confidence, hey, no, we just took a sample on Wednesday morning, and here's the latest results, and we've got all greens. Take your family out on the river. We can also educate people about those pollution problems. That coalition, that project has been tremendous. We did it last year for 15 weeks, and we had thousands of users, and we didn't even promote it. I want to see this thing, when you watch the Thursday news, I want you to hear about the pollen count, the traffic report, and I want a rivers water quality report on the news, and we're going to work and make sure that happens. So again, if you're going to go out and you're going to go fly fishing or tubing or kayaking, howsmyscriver.org is a phenomenal tool that we have. This year we're going to be able to drop hotspots too, so if we know about a spill or a problem, we can put that on a map. I know it works because I was at Saluda Shoals Park and we had a plant upset, and we put a message on the website and lit it up. And a guy gets out there and he's with his girlfriend and his dog. He's about to go swimming. He goes, hold on, let me check that new website. And he pulls it up and he goes, oh, it says there's a problem right here. I was watching. I was going to tell him if he didn't do this. But he looks and he goes, oh, hey, we need to go somewhere else. The thing says that there's a sewer problem over here. And his girlfriend yells at him for a little bit. And then I stepped in and I was like, no, it's great. What you're doing is really important. You're using the tool as it's intended. We want everyone in the Midlands to be able to use that stuff. So water quality monitoring is an important part. One of the other big things that we're working on is water quantity. So I talk about bacteria numbers, and I talk about sewer spills and plant upsets. And we can fix all those problems, but if we don't have enough water in these rivers so that you can put in a boat so that a fish can swim, then it's a lot of work for nothing. Water quantity is absolutely important. We've been working to make sure that we have appropriate flows in these rivers to protect the river itself, but also those uses. So I've been working on relicensing 2 hydropower projects on the Broad River for about the last 6.5 years. That means I go to a lot of damn meetings. That's my best joke, come on. But seriously, that relicensing work, you get one shot every 40 or 50 years to see how these dams operate. And that's everything from flows to water quality issues, operations, and even recreational access. So really, once in a generation opportunities to do this. That's what we've been working on. We've also been working on flow protection at the policy level, working with folks from DHEC to the EPA to other organizations across the state. I work on several committees working on our state water plan, and I've also been picking fights at the State House to try and make sure that we have appropriate flows, that our flawed Surface Water Withdrawal Act actually gets fixed so that it makes sense, it uses the best science, and it uses things like common sense. Right now we have some serious problems with that law that we need to address. So those are a couple of issues. One other issue I'm going to talk about real quickly before I just open it up to you guys to ask me questions is coal tar. So how many of you are familiar with the coal tar in the Congaree River? A handful of you. So there are right now approximately 40,000 tons of toxic waste sitting on the bottom of the Congaree River below the Gervais Street Bridge. In the early 1900s, SCE&G operated a coal gasification plant on Hugie Street right by the State Museum. And they created city gas. It was the gas that was used for lighting streetlights and heating homes. And the byproduct of creating that gas was this nasty stuff called coal tar. And what did they do with that when they had it as the byproduct? Well, they dumped it out back behind the building in a ditch. That ditch went into a small stream that comes out just below the Gervais Street Bridge. So from the early 1900s through the mid-1950s, that was the practice there. That plant shut down. It later became the City of Columbia's bus yard. In the 1950s, the precursor to DHEC, the South Carolina Public Health Commission, got some letters and some complaints, and they went to SCE&G and said, hey, what's up with all this coal tar in the river? And then about nothing happened until 2007. And SCE&G was going to clean up that bus site, and they had to do some remediation work, and they did an investigation, and they found coal tar in this creek. And they followed it all the way down. They got all the way to the edge of the river, and they found coal tar there. And they said, oh, there's coal tar here in this creek. And they tested it, and they said, it's got pollutants at high enough levels to potentially cause cancer. And they looked around, and they said, well, we're not going to look any further. Let's stop looking right now. And they stopped. And they were going to just clean up their site, and that was going to be the end of it. Until 2010, when a local kayaker and a guy who worked with me as a river guide stepped in this tar. And we'd all stepped in the tar a couple times, but he did something that day. He stepped in it. He made 2 phone calls. He called DHEC. He said, hey, there's some tar-like material down here, and it kind of burns my skin, and I just stepped in a bunch of it. And then he made a second phone call, and thank God he did. He called WIS. And they came down with a camera crew. And all of a sudden, you couldn't just blow this off because people were talking about it. And so very publicly in 2010, SCE&G SCANA said, we will clean up this coal tar. We're going to be a great corporate citizen, and we're going to do the right thing, and we're going to clean it up. Well, a few years later, very quietly, without the fanfare that they did the first time in closed meetings with a couple agency folks, they said, we're not going to clean up this coal tar. In fact, we're going to cover it up. About a third of that plume, we're going to cover with a piece of fabric and some rocks, and we're going to leave the rest of it there forever. And they said, that's completely acceptable. What they told me was, Bill, trust us. We're SCANA. We'll do the right thing, and we'll always be here. Yeah. So my organization's stance has been that coal tar has to be removed. That the citizens of this community, the people who care about this river, who use this river, should not be burdened with a toxic legacy that every future generation will have to deal with. Cleaning this stuff is critically important. We filed notice of intent to sue letters against SCANA and the Army Corps of Engineers in November of last year. We've been actively negotiating with those groups since then, and we hope to have some announcements soon. The reality is, you shouldn't be stuck with someone else's mess, and that's exactly what they're trying to do here. That area is too popular, it is too important, it is a gateway to our city, it is a highlight of our city, and we can't let SCE&G get away with their corporate pollution while putting the burden on the rest of us. So that is another important issue we worked on. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that is another really important piece. But I would love to open it up to you guys if you have any questions. Yes, sir?
What are the trends now in fish counts, both in volume and diversity for the three rivers?
All right, so there's a lot of different fisheries research going on, and so we're seeing increased numbers in things like shad coming up and using the fish passage on the Broad River. The trout on the lower Saluda are actually reproducing naturally on their own because of improvements to things like dissolved oxygen in that river. 10 years ago, if I'd have told you that there were wild trout naturally reproducing on the Saluda River, I would have been laughed out of any room in this town. But that's actually what's happening right now. The striper count, you're going to have to talk to some folks who are fishing because the striper run is going on right now. So we don't really have those numbers. But one of the big things about our fisheries here, unlike a lot of other parts in the state, we don't have a lot of these fish consumption advisories. So mercury is a big concern in eating fish. We only have a handful of fish that have those advisories in our area. So we're actually much better off than other parts of the state. Part of that is geography and certain things, and part of that is just that, you know, our fish are pretty healthy over here. But it's hard to get into very specifics. So I'd like to end by saying one thing. I know.
We are Rotarians, they're nice.
That's right. I said earlier that these rivers belong to each and every one of us. And that's true, but it's only true to the extent that you're willing to stand up and fight for them. So if you care about these rivers, please be engaged. Respond to that action alert. Call that elected official when you need to. Show up at that public hearing. Volunteer for that cleanup. Be a voice for your rivers, because if you don't stand up and claim them and say, these are my rivers, someone else will take it from you. Thank you guys very much.
Really appreciate that, and he said he would stick around for a few minutes if anybody has additional questions. And we're over our time, so we're going to go ahead and just end. Y'all have a great week.